My book club read Theo of Golden last month. This is a novel set in a small, vibrant river town in Georgia, and it's lovingly portrayed intriguing characters running a bookstore, a coffee shop, as well as other businesses. The main character, Theo, is an elderly newcomer, and he's a bit of a mystery. Now, the coffee shop displays portraits of the townspeople created by a local artist. One by one, Theo purchases and offers the portrait to the person portrayed. He does this by requesting a meeting in a public park next to a fountain in the middle of the day. And if the person shows up and takes the risk of meeting with a stranger, the conversations ensue. The recurrent theme is the importance of seeing others with understanding. The artist sees and expresses in each portrait a piece of that person. Theo sees each portrayed face, and each longtime resident who comes to the bench has a conversation with Theo, and they begin to see each other, a longtime resident and a newcomer. My favorite scene is when the journalist meets Theo, intending to interview him for a story. He persuades the journalist to hold off on her story. And in the ensuing conversation, she describes a childhood that was a minefield of taunts from her father and others, taunting her about her size, about her plainness. And this is the image she held of herself, this bruised image of herself from childhood she held into adulthood. But Theo tells her of what he sees. He tells her of the intelligence and character that he sees both in her presence and in her portrait. And then he asks her to imagine holding that awkward childhood image of herself in her hands. And then he asks her to exchange. She passes over the flawed image and accepts in its place the artist's portrayal. To be able to see another with understanding and compassion, and to be able to see that someone else sees us with our flaws, but also with our strengths. That's such an important part of loving. Today's gospel begins and ends with love. It takes place after the Last Supper, after Jesus has dismissed Judas Iscariot, washed the feet of the disciples, and Jesus is now preparing his disciples for the trials to come. And in the first sentence of this passage, Jesus declares that if his disciples love him, they will keep his commandments. And in the previous chapter, Jesus had proclaimed his new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. He will reiterate this in the chapter that follows. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. So Jesus is asking his disciples to go and love as he has loved them. But Jesus was a revered teacher. He was a miracle worker. It must have seemed impossible to the disciples to imagine continuing without Jesus. And they have questions. In last week's reading, Thomas asked, how can they know the way to the place where Jesus is going? And Philip asked him, show me the Father. The disciples are fearful, uncertain. Jesus reassures them they will not be alone. They will not be orphaned. They will have assistance. Jesus promises an advocate. The gospel uses the Greek word parakletos. An advocate is only one translation of parakletos. It can also be translated as one who is called near, a helper, an intercessor, a mediator, a comforter. So rather than our limited notion of an advocate as a lawyer type, speaking on our behalf, sort of making our case before God with the request that God do something merciful for us, instead, Parakletos is broader. It reflects the many ways that Jesus, through his ministry, demonstrated all forms of love. Jesus asks his followers to embrace the lived reality that he revealed, a simple Nazarene who fed the hungry, healed the sick, touched the untouchable, concerned himself with the well-being of women and children. And Jesus also names this advocate as the Spirit of Truth. So how do we enlarge our capacities to hear and recognize and make room for a spirit of truth, both within us and among us? In my experience, hearing each other's stories is one way to open up space to recognize and receive that aha moment in which we make that more authentic, loving connection. Recently, I heard from a city official about the impact that one story had on his understanding of challenges facing 10,000 city residents without cars. The story he heard was told at the Justice Knox Nehemiah Action Assembly last month. Present at the assembly were city officials, county candidates for mayor, as well as Justice Ministry Network members from multiple congregations. And a young woman, Mia, from New Hope Missionary Baptist Church, stood up looking out at 1,680 some odd faces. She spoke of her struggles to navigate life in Knoxville without a car. Without a car, her choices of where to live, where to rent an apartment, are limited to what she could afford that was located on her bus line so she could get to where she works. Without a car, she has to schedule every single errand to coincide with the bus schedule and is limited to those destinations reachable by bus. Washing clothes at a laundromat, shopping, carrying groceries, all are activities which require a lot of time, a lot of planning for transfers, multiple stops. It was not just her description of the difficulties, but the tremor in her voice as she described her feelings of missing out on connections with people, activities, events, sometimes even going to church because of her lack of transportation. Boy, I saw it as an act of courage and love for her to acknowledge her vulnerabilities in front of 1,680 some odd people, and to speak out on behalf of others who face these challenges. It was also a moment of witnessing the Spirit of Truth in the sincerity of your testimony and feeling that spirit when she got really nervous and her pastor quietly reached out, touched her shoulder in reassurance that steadied her nervous voice. Others heard that Spirit of Truth. Grant Rosenberg was the city mayor's representative at the Nehemiah Action. He was sitting in the front row facing Mia just as she spoke. And several weeks later, he met with the Justice Knox research team to take next steps to address where and how to extend transportation solutions to the neediest in the city. Grant Rosenberg remembered Mia's name. He remembered her story. He thanked Justice Knox for telling that story. It gifted him with a different understanding of the importance of his tasks. He works in offices in front of a computer screen, so he was grateful and enlightened and changed by the opportunity to put a face to the challenges of some city residents. We need to include bus riders, people like Mia, in the planning process, he told the team. But making space for loving communications can be also in small, ordinary events. I don't have to wait to be approached by a stranger with a portrait. Although reading about that exchange reminded me of the importance of making time in my life, making room in my life where those conversations, those moments of giving and receiving can occur. I may not have a riveting personal story to tell, but I can listen, for example, to the strident opinions and then also the more personal concerns of a relative who lives alone and needs a sounding board. And I don't have to do this on my own by myself. Jesus promises that an advocate, helper, counselor is there to lean on as I try to learn patient listening with an ailing friend or relative, as I try to learn to choose conversation over phone scrolling, as we all give up our leisure hours to help out somewhere like Family Promise, Men's Club, or Martha's Kitchen, or as we're encouraged simply to share a meal with others. So let us pray. Come, Spirit of truth, and dwell within us and among us. Comfort and help us as we seek to discern what is right and to take on what is needed. Come, strengthen us as we seek to comfort and help others, and as we seek to walk in alignment with God's will.